Every night at exactly 11:45 in the winter of 1943, a guard at a Nazi labor camp in occupied Poland would walk his final patrol route before the midnight shift change. His boots crunched through the snow in a predictable pattern that prisoners had memorized after weeks of careful observation. But what the camp commandant never knew, what the other SS guards never suspected, was that this man was committing an act of treason so subtle and so dangerous that discovery would mean immediate execution. For 3 months, Guard Sergeant Hans Müller deliberately left the eastern gate unlocked every single night, creating a window of exactly 17 minutes where prisoners could slip into the frozen forest and vanish into the darkness. This is the story they buried, the impossible act of defiance that saved lives in the heart of hell itself. And the question that still haunts historians today is simply this: why would a member of the SS, a man who had sworn an oath to Hitler himself, risk everything to let his enemies escape? The Gross-Rosen labor camp sat in the industrial heartland of Lower Silesia, a region the Nazis had transformed into a sprawling network of forced labor, sites designed to fuel the German war machine. By late 1943, over 40,000 prisoners were scattered across its sub-camps, working themselves to death in granite quarries and armament factories. These were not the extermination camps like Avitz or Treblinka, where death came quickly in gas chambers, but rather places where death arrived slowly through exhaustion, starvation, and the brutal cold of the Polish winter. The prisoners were mostly political enemies, resistance fighters, Soviet PS, and Jews deemed healthy enough to work before their inevitable end. The guards who watched over them were a mixture of SS veterans, older Wehrmacht soldiers deemed unfit for the front lines, and younger recruits being hardened for eventual combat duty. Life expectancy for a prisoner rarely exceeded 6 months, and escape was considered virtually impossible due to the harsh terrain, the network of informants in surrounding villages, and the standing order that any guard who allowed an escape would face court-martial and likely execution himself. Hans Müller had arrived at Gross-Rosen in September of 1943 after serving 2 years on the Eastern Front, where he had witnessed atrocities that hollowed him out from the inside. He was 31 years old, a former schoolteacher from Bavaria who had joined the Nazi Party in 1937, not out of ideological fervor, but because party membership had become essential for government employment. His war began with patriotic enthusiasm that curdled into horror somewhere between Minsk and Smolensk, where he watched SS Einheit Grin units execute entire villages, while Wehrmacht officers looked the other way. By the time he was transferred to Gross-Rosen, following a shrapnel wound to his left leg that left him with a permanent limp, Müller was a man who no longer believed in the cause he served, but was trapped within it by fear, duty, and the knowledge that questioning orders meant death. He requested the night watch specifically because it kept him away from the daytime brutality, the beatings and executions that happened when the commandant made his rounds. The transformation from passive observer to active saboteur began on a November night so cold that the guard towers themselves seemed to shake. Müller was conducting his 11:30 patrol when he discovered a young prisoner, a Polish boy who could not have been older than 16, frozen to death just 3 meters from the fence line. The boy had clearly been trying to reach the gap in the wire that everyone whispered about, but no one dared attempt, driven by desperation to escape, or perhaps simply choosing to die in pursuit of freedom, rather than wait for starvation to claim him. Something in Müller broke that night, some final thread of self-deception that had allowed him to tell himself he was just following orders, just surviving, just doing his duty. He stood over that frozen boy for nearly 20 minutes, the wind howling around him, and made a decision that would define the rest of his short life. The Eastern Gate was the camp's weakest point, a fact that Müller had noted during his first week, but had reported to no one. It sat at the terminus of the patrol route, partially hidden by a storage building that blocked sight lines from the nearest guard tower. The lock was old and temperamental, requiring a specific technique to ensure it fully engaged, something the camp's stretched resources and indifferent maintenance crews had never addressed. Müller realized that if he simply failed to apply that final pressure, if he left the lock appearing closed, but actually unengaged, a prisoner who knew what to look for could open it with bare hands and slip through. The risk was enormous because the next guard shift would discover the deception when they checked the locks at midnight. But Miller had noticed something crucial about human nature in military bureaucracy. The midnight shift guards were lazy, cold, and eager to get inside to the warmth of the guardhouse, and they had begun skipping the physical lock checks in favor of simply assuming the evening shift had done their job properly. For 3 nights, Miller left the gate unlocked and waited, terrified and exhilarated in equal measure, wondering if anyone would notice, if anyone would dare try, and what price he would pay for this betrayal. On the 4th night, when he made his dawn patrol before going off duty, he found footprints in the fresh snow leading away from the eastern gate toward the treeing, and he knew that someone had taken the chance he offered. Mueller carefully swept snow over the tracks with a pine branch and returned to his barracks, where he lay awake, trembling with the knowledge that he had just committed treason against the Third Reich and saved at least one life in the process. The question that consumed him as dawn broke over the frozen camp was whether he had the courage to do it again. And the answer that rose from somewhere deep within him was a single word that would seal his fate. Yes, the system Miller developed over the following weeks was built on careful observation of human patterns and the exploitation of institutional laziness that pervades all military bureaucracies. He learned that the midnight shift consisted of 2 guards who rotated their duties, and both men were older Wehrmacht transfers who viewed camp duty as preferable to freezing in a trench on the Eastern Front. They had developed a routine where one would make a cursory walk of the inner perimeter while the other prepared coffee in the guardhouse, and neither bothered with the time-consuming task of physically checking every lock when they could simply assume their predecessor had done his job. Miller capitalized on this by ensuring his paperwork was always immaculate, his reports always filed on time, and his demeanor always exactly what was expected of a competent, if unremarkable, SS guard. He became invisible through perfect mediocrity, the kind of soldier superiors never remember, because he never gives them reason to notice him. The prisoners who discovered the unlocked gate had their own intelligence network, a whispered communication system that moved information through the barracks with remarkable speed and efficiency. Word spread through careful channels that the eastern gate was vulnerable during a specific window each night, though no one understood why or suspected it was deliberate sabotage rather than simple negligence.